Hello again. I'm Dennis Morgeson, the agent for horticulture education here in Washington County. And if you've been following some of our horticulture how-to videos, you would have seen the videos where we talked about the grow light system here, and then we actually planted some seedlings here. So it's now time to transplant. It's been about 16 to 18 days since the seeding, so we'll go ahead and talk about our little transplants here, and then how to transplant them, and some tips on how to keep those growing healthy. First little flat here, you can see they're growing nicely. They've already grown at least one set, maybe even two sets of true leaves, which is what you would want them to have. Now, even if you grew those in a flat, in a row, and you were going to transplant those out, you do want to let them grow at least one set of true leaves before you actually start to dig those out and transplant those. With these, we grew these in these little pellets, not because they're my favorite thing to grow in, but because I had a lot of them and I thought I'd go ahead and use them. And they've worked out pretty nicely, as you can see here. This little plant here is doing quite well. You can see the roots. If you look closely, maybe you can see them, but the roots are starting to come out of the little cell here, and that's a sure sign that it's time for this plant to be transplanted, because whenever these roots come out of this cell here, they get air pruned, so that they get killed off. So this plant is not going to grow very well or very large in this little pellet anymore, so it's kind of maxed out its little growth area here. Another thing is, when you transplant, you want to make sure you handle the transplant. If you're doing by these, it's easy to handle these because you can handle by the little root ball here. But if you've dug those out of a flat and the plants are actually, the root systems are actually getting upset, and you're pulling those out, then you want to make sure that you handle them with the leaves, either the true leaves or the seed leaves that came out, but never handle them with the stem, because if you were to squeeze that stem too tight or break that stem, then you've lost your plant. If you lose a leaf, that's fine. It'll grow back. If you lose the stem, then your plant's over. Now with these, what I'm going to do is I'm going to transplant these into these little peat pots. Another thing about these is, only because these were cheap, I had some of these left, so I'm going to go ahead and use those. I could have grown these in some plastic pots or some containers that I had saved and rinsed them with 10% bleach solution. I know some people like to seed directly in the flat that they're going to plant from. That's fine. You just make sure that you have enough seeds planted in there to make sure you get one per cell. The flats of 48 that many of us buy our plants in, those are fine to seed in as long as you've washed those first. But if I do that, I want to make sure I put 2 seeds per cell, and then I'll go through and cut the extra plant out. I know that sounds harsh, but that's what you have to do sometime. That way I'll make sure that I have a whole flat of plants. Now, why do I not prefer to grow my plants that way? Well, the reason is, if you look at these, several of these different varieties, and there's 23 different varieties of tomatoes on this rack back here. Some of them grow a lot faster than others and germinate a lot quicker. When you grow them all in a flat like that, and they're all different varieties, some of those varieties jump ahead and then they'll smother the other ones out or make them spindly. So by starting them in these little cells, I can transplant them out in these cups. I can give them space, and all my plants then can be the same size whenever I want to plant them. Now with these peat pots, there's no reason to put a hole in these. These peat is porous, the water will run through. Another thing that's good about these, eventually this little plant, when you plant it, you see the roots are coming out of that root ball. When you put them in here, eventually they're going to come through this peat pot too. The goal is, by the time that root starts to come through that peat pot, then it's time for this to go in the garden, which is going to be sometime in the first week of May to get past our usual frost-free date. Our average last frost, not freeze, frost in central Kentucky is April the 28th. Now last year we had a late freeze, which was into May, which is very late. It's highly unusual, but just keep in mind that we could go past that frost-free date. So when you get to that April 28th date, look at the extended forecast and see what the forecast low temperatures are for the next week out. If it's going to be iffy in 30s and 40s, then go ahead and keep your plants in the pots. They'll be happier there, where you can bring them indoors rather than outside and taking a chance from getting frosted or even a little cold damage, which sets them back a little bit. So to transplant, all I've got to do is I have a good soulless medium here, and I say a soulless medium, a potting soil. You do not want to use garden soil because there's lots of reasons it compacts in these containers. You bring in diseases and things that in this flat and in this environment under this light, whether it's warm or whatever, those diseases can take off, which as they might not out in the actual wild soil. So I always want to buy or use a really nice or high-end potting medium. Many of you know what brand many of these are. There's lots of them out there. So this one's one of the formulas that it's got the bark, the perlite, the peat, and all that kind of thing in there. There really is no real soil in this, but all this little cube was peat. So they don't really need that. These have been fertilized one time with a water-soluble fertilizer. It's one of those that turns the water blue, so you can make the determination of what that was. There's lots of brands of those out there. Most of them do turn the water blue, though. So what do I want to do? I'm just going to put some soil into this little container here. And you don't have to, and it's nothing saying that you have to. It's going to even help the plant. But the tomato plant can actually grow roots up the stem. And these are not leggy. They're a nice little plant. But I am going to bury that just a little bit more because I want that to get a really fat stem on it. And a few more roots on the stem is not going to hurt this plant. It's not necessarily going to help it. A lot of people think by burying it up deeper, then you get more roots on that stem, the plant actually grows better. Research doesn't show that it grows any better. But I want a shorter, squattier plant initially. So I'm going to go ahead. I got to put a little bit too much soil in there. And I'm going to plop it down in there. You can see there, I've put it down in there. All I got to do now is backfill around it. And then we'll firm it in a little bit. A little extra there. Now, his next step will go from this pot to the soil. First, we're going to grow another 3 weeks under the light, and then it'll be a nice plant. And of course, I'll show you in a video what these are. So the next step I have to do is I have to label these because I want to know what all these are. Because when you grow 23 different varieties, actually going to be more 25 or 27 before it's over with. I'm only going to grow like a plant or two of each one. Most of them would be one plant because it's a lot of tomatoes. But you can see there's more than one in here, so I'll give some of these away. This one is Wetson Wonder. So I'm going to go ahead and make a label for that. Told you this before, but the cheapest, easiest labels that you can make is just get a cheap mini blind. You can get an old one that's been used, or you can even buy a new one. I know it sounds harsh, but this blind was $4. I'm going to get a lot of plant labels out of that, and it's a lot cheaper than buying the plastic plant labels. Get your trusty pruners out. So we're just going to cut, and you can cut several of these at one time this way, which is really handy. So I've got those cut. All I'm going to do now is make a label with Wetson Wonder on it. I'll stick it in the container, and then I'll set it back in the flat here, and then we'll set it under the grow light. I'm Dennis Morgeson. If you have any questions pertaining to gardening or horticulture, give me a call at the Washington County Extension Office at 859-336-7741. Happy gardening.